A single dad finds a note in his son's backpack. The paper is crumpled, folded unevenly, the way only a child's hands would fold it. Purple ink, hearts dotting the letter I. And then, a name. A name he hasn't spoken out loud in 5 years. A name that belonged to his wife. But here's the thing. His wife has been gone since their son was only 2 years old. So why is a 7-year-old girl at his son's school writing about her? What this single father discovered next would shatter everything he thought he understood about grief, about loss, and about the mysterious ways love finds its way back to us. By the end of this story, you'll understand why some connections in life can never be explained, only felt. Why some hearts refuse to stop beating even when everything says they should. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach.
The alarm went off at exactly 6:15 a.m. Terrence Hayes didn't need it anymore. His body had learned to wake up 3 minutes before it rang. 5 years of the same routine had programmed him like clockwork. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbed his eyes, and took a breath before standing. The apartment was quiet. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, a living room with a worn leather couch that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. By 6:20, the coffee maker was gurgling. By 6:35, scrambled eggs sizzled in the pan. By 6:45, Terrence stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom. "Caleb, time to get up, buddy." The small lump under the dinosaur-printed comforter groaned. 5 more minutes. Terrence smiled. The same negotiation every morning. "You said that 10 minutes ago. Come on, eggs are getting cold." 7-year-old Caleb finally emerged, his brown hair sticking up in every direction, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He shuffled to the bathroom while Terrence laid out his clothes for the day. This was their rhythm, their lifeline. Wake up, breakfast, backpack check, out the door by 7:30, drop off at Parkview Elementary. Then Terrence would drive 20 minutes to his job as an electrician at Henderson Construction, where he'd spend 9 hours running wires through half-finished buildings. Pick up Caleb from after-school care by 5:30. Dinner, homework, bath, story, bed. Repeat. It was exhausting. It was relentless, but it kept them moving forward, and some days moving forward was the only victory Terrence could claim. That Thursday afternoon in late October started like any other. Terrence pulled up to the after-school care center at 5:27, right on schedule. He spotted Caleb sitting on the bench near the entrance, his backpack clutched in his lap. But something was different. Usually, Caleb would be chatting with other kids or showing off some drawing he'd made. Today, he sat alone, staring at nothing. "Hey, buddy." Terrence opened the car door for him. "How was your day?" "Fine." One word. No details. No stories about recess or what funny thing happened at lunch. Terrence glanced in the rearview mirror as they pulled away. Caleb was staring out the window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the sidewalks. "You okay?" A small nod. Terrence made a mental note to check in later, but didn't push. Caleb had always been a thoughtful kid, sometimes retreating into his own mind the way Terrence himself did. That evening, after a dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Terrence began his nightly routine of preparing Caleb's backpack for the next day. Permission slips? Check. Lunchbox emptied and rinsed? Check. Completed homework folder? Check. And then, tucked between a crumpled spelling test and a library book about dinosaurs, he found it. A folded piece of paper. The fold was uneven, messy in the way only a child's hands would make. Terrence almost tossed it aside, assuming it was scrap paper or a random doodle. But something made him unfold it. Purple ink, careful but wobbly handwriting, little hearts dotting every letter I. Terrence began to read. "Dear Caleb, My mama says your mama was a hero. She says your mama saved her life. My mama's name is Simone, and she got a new heart. She told me the lady who gave her the heart was named Janelle. Is that your mama? I think maybe she lives in my mama's chest now. Maybe that's why I wanted to be your friend. Your friend, Kira. Terrence's hands began to tremble.
The kitchen seemed to shrink around him. The hum of the refrigerator grew distant, muffled, like he was hearing it from underwater. Janelle. He read the name again and again. His wife's name, written in purple ink by a 7-year-old girl he'd never met. But that was impossible. Janelle had been gone for 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of carefully avoiding that name, protecting himself from the sharp edges of grief that still hadn't dulled. And now here it was, staring up at him from a child's letter. Terrence lowered himself into a kitchen chair, the note still clutched in his shaking hands. "Daddy?" He looked up. Caleb stood in the doorway, his dinosaur pajamas slightly too big, his eyes wide with concern. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Terrence touched his face. His fingers came away wet. He hadn't even realized. If you've ever felt a moment where the past suddenly crashes into the present, where a single word or name brings everything flooding back, then you already understand what Terrence was feeling in that kitchen. If this story is already pulling at your heart, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Trust me, you'll want to stay for what happens next. To understand why that name hit Terrence like a freight train, you need to understand who Janelle Hayes was. She was the kind of woman who didn't just enter a room, she transformed it. Terrence met her 11 years ago at a friend's backyard barbecue in Cleveland. He was 25, fresh out of his electrician apprenticeship, still figuring out who he wanted to be. She was 26, already a registered nurse at Cleveland Metro Hospital, and completely out of his league. At least, that's what he thought. She was standing by the drink table, laughing at something someone said, and Terrence found himself frozen in place. Honey-brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes that seemed to catch every bit of sunlight, a laugh that made everyone around her smile without even knowing why. He spent 20 minutes working up the courage to talk to her. "Nice shoes," was all he managed to say. She looked down at her beat-up sneakers, covered with grass stains and clearly years old, and burst out laughing. "These ancient things? I've had them since college. They're basically held together by hope and stubbornness at this point." Terrence grinned. "Sounds like most things worth keeping." She tilted her head, studying him. "That's either really deep or really cheesy. Can it be both?" Her smile widened. "I'm Janelle." "Terrence." And just like that, his life changed. They dated for 2 years before he proposed, on a quiet beach near Lake Erie at sunset, with a ring he'd saved 8 months to afford. She said yes before he even finished the question. Their wedding was small, 60 people in a rented hall, dancing to a playlist they'd made together, eating cake that Janelle's mother had insisted on baking herself. It was perfect. The next 4 years were the happiest of Terrence's life. Janelle continued working at the hospital, often pulling double shifts in the emergency room. She had a gift for calming frightened patients, a gentle voice and steady presence that made people feel safe even in their worst moments. "It's not about fixing everything," she told Terrence once, after a particularly hard shift. "Sometimes people just need to know they're not alone, that someone sees them." When she got pregnant, they cried together in the bathroom of their tiny apartment, staring at the positive test in disbelief. Caleb Terrence Hayes was born on a rainy Tuesday morning, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with his mother's curious eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Terrence had never known love could feel so overwhelming. Watching Janelle hold their son for the first time, he made a silent promise to protect them both, no matter what. But life, he would learn, doesn't care about promises. It was an ordinary Saturday morning. Caleb was 2 years old.
Terrence had taken him to the park down the street, their weekend tradition, while Janelle stayed home to catch up on laundry. She'd seemed fine when they left. Tired, maybe, but she'd been working extra shifts that month. "Bring me back a coffee," she'd called out as they headed for the door. "Large vanilla latte." "Got it." She blew them both a kiss. That was the last time Terrence saw his wife conscious.
When he and Caleb returned an hour later, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Janelle? No answer. He found her on the kitchen floor. At first, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. She was just resting, he told himself. She'd gotten dizzy and sat down. But she wasn't sitting. She was collapsed, unresponsive, her skin pale, her lips slightly blue. The next hours were a blur. Ambulance, sirens, running through hospital corridors while a neighbor watched Caleb. Doctors using words that didn't make sense. Ruptured brain aneurysm, massive hemorrhage, no brain activity. "Mr. Hayes, we did everything we could." Terrence remembered screaming. He remembered falling. He remembered someone catching him before he hit the ground. What he didn't remember was agreeing to meet with the organ donation coordinator, but apparently he did. Janelle had been a registered organ donor since she was 18. Of course she had. This was a woman who spent her entire life helping others. Why would death be any different? Through the fog of grief, Terrence gave his permission. Her heart went to a woman in Cleveland who'd been on the waiting list for 2 years. Her liver saved a father of 3 in Columbus. Her kidneys gave 2 strangers a second chance at life. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived. Terrence couldn't open them. He put them in a shoebox, sealed and silent, and shoved the box into the back of his closet. Some things were too heavy to carry, and those letters, filled with gratitude for a gift that had cost Terrence everything, were more than he could bear. So he buried them. He buried her name, too. For 5 years, Terrence Hayes kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other, because his son needed him. But he never spoke her name out loud. Not once. Until tonight. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. And some days that weight feels impossible. If you've ever lost someone who felt irreplaceable, you know exactly what I mean. Drop a heart in the comments if this story is resonating with you. And if you haven't already, now's the perfect time to subscribe, because this story is just getting started.
Terrence didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table for hours, the purple inked letters spread out before him, reading those words over and over until they blurred together. "My mama says your mama was a hero. She got a new heart. The lady who gave her the heart was named Janelle." By 3 a.m., he'd made a decision. He needed to know more. The next morning, after dropping Caleb off at school, Terrence requested a meeting with Mrs. Patterson, Caleb's second-grade teacher. She was a kind woman in her mid-50s, with gray-streaked hair pinned back in a bun and reading glasses perpetually balanced on the tip of her nose. "Mr. Hayes," she seemed surprised to see him. "Is everything all right with Caleb?" "He's fine. Terrence hesitated. "I wanted to ask about one of his classmates, a girl named Kira." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "Kira Monroe. Lovely child. She joined our class about 3 months ago when her family moved to the area." "She and Caleb, they're friends?" "Very much so," Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Kira's a thoughtful little girl, always sharing her snacks, making sure no one sits alone at lunch. She and Caleb have become quite close. They partner up for almost every project." Terrence nodded slowly, processing this information. His son had a close friend he barely knew about. When had he stopped asking the right questions? "Her mother, Simone Monroe. Do you know her?" "Oh, yes, Simone is wonderful.
Very involved in school activities, she volunteers for class events, helps with the reading program. Mrs. Patterson studied Terrence's face. "Mr. Hayes, may I ask why you're inquiring?" Terrence opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain? How could he put into words what he barely understood himself? It's complicated," he finally said. "But thank you. You've been very helpful." He walked out of the school in a daze. Simone Monroe. The name from the letter suddenly felt real. This wasn't some abstract stranger. This was a woman with a daughter in his son's class, a woman who volunteered at school events, a woman who, if Kira's letter was accurate, was walking around with his wife's heart beating in her chest. That evening, after Caleb was asleep, Terrence stood before his bedroom closet. The shoebox was exactly where he'd left it, shoved behind old winter coats and forgotten boxes of photographs. Dust covered the lid. It had been nearly 5 years since he touched it. His hands trembled as he lifted it out. Inside were 7 envelopes, all addressed to the Hayes family. Some had return addresses. Some were anonymous, sent through the hospital's organ donation program. Terrence spread them across his bed, searching for one from someone named Simone. He found it near the bottom. A cream-colored envelope, heavier than the others, with neat handwriting. The postmark was from nearly 5 years ago, just a month after Janelle died. For several minutes, Terrence just held it. All those years of avoiding this moment. All those years of telling himself he wasn't ready. But Kira's letter had changed something, broken something open. He carefully unsealed the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant but slightly uneven, written by someone whose hands weren't entirely steady. "Dear Hayes family," the letter began. "I am writing to you during the most bittersweet moment of my entire life. My name is Simone Monroe, and 3 weeks ago I received the most extraordinary gift a person can receive, a new heart. For 2 years I was on the transplant waiting list. My own heart, damaged by a viral infection I didn't even know I had, was failing. Slowly, then quickly, then desperately. 6 months ago, my doctors told me I likely had less than a year to live unless a match was found. I have a daughter, Kira, who was only 2 years old at the time. The thought of leaving her, of missing her first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first heartbreak, was unbearable. I cried myself to sleep every night, begging the universe for more time. And then the call came. A heart was available, a match. I do not know the name of the person whose heart now beats inside my chest. The hospital told me only that she was a young woman, a wife, a mother, a nurse who spent her life caring for others. I cannot imagine what you are going through. I cannot imagine the depth of your loss. But I need you to know, I need you to understand that your loved one's sacrifice has given me a second chance. Last week, I watched Kira build a sandcastle at the beach. I was there. I was breathing. I was alive because of your wife, because of your generosity. There are no words adequate enough to express my gratitude. Thank you feels too small, too simple for something this profound. But I will say it anyway. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to give life even in your darkest moment. Thank you for allowing your wife's legacy to continue beating in someone else's chest. I promise you, I promise that I will not waste this gift. I will watch my daughter grow up. I will be there for her first day of school, her graduations, her wedding. Every moment I have from this day forward is because of your loved one's generosity. I carry her with me always, not just in my chest, but in my heart, in the truest sense of that word. With eternal gratitude and deepest sympathy, Simone Monroe. Terrence couldn't see the words anymore. His vision had blurred completely.
Tears streamed down his face, soaking the paper, smudging the ink in places. For the first time in 5 years, he wept. Not the quiet, controlled grief he'd learned to manage, not the late-night tears he quickly wiped away before Caleb could see. This was different. This was a dam breaking. He wept for Janelle, for her laugh, for her warmth, for the way she used to sing off-key while cooking dinner. He wept for Caleb, for the mother he would never truly remember, for the bedtime stories she never got to read, for the graduations she would never attend. He wept for himself, for the man he used to be, for the future they'd planned together, for the loneliness he'd carried every single day. And somewhere in the middle of all that grief, something else emerged. Something unexpected. Hope. Janelle was still out there. Not the way she used to be, not her voice or her smile or the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. But her heart, her actual physical heart was still beating, still keeping time, still giving life. Kira watched her daughter build sandcastles because of Janelle. Kira had a mother to come home to every day because of Janelle. And somehow, through some strange, impossible twist of fate, that little girl ended up in Caleb's classroom, writing a note in purple ink, connecting two families who should never have known each other. Terrence wiped his eyes and looked at the letter again. I carry her with me always. For 5 years, he'd been afraid of this moment. Afraid that confronting the donation, seeing evidence of where pieces of Janelle had gone, would destroy him. But it didn't. It felt strangely like coming home. Have you ever experienced a moment where grief transformed into something you didn't expect? Where pain gave way to peace, even just for a second? That's the power of stories like this. They remind us that loss isn't the end. Sometimes it's just a different kind of beginning. If you're still with me, leave a comment below. Tell me what you're feeling right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that button. Be part of this community.
2 weeks passed. Terrence spent that time doing something he hadn't done in years. He talked about Janelle. He told Caleb stories, little ones at first, how Mommy used to burn pancakes every single time because she always got distracted singing along to the radio, how she wore the same beat-up sneakers for years because she said they were lucky. Caleb listened with wide eyes, hungry for every detail. Tell me more, he'd say every night. Tell me more about Mommy. And Terrence did. It hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt, like stretching a muscle that had been cramped for too long. Painful, but healing. He also did something terrifying. He found Simone Monroe's address through the school directory and wrote her a letter. Dear Simone, he began, my name is Terrence Hayes. I believe my wife's heart beats inside your chest. I found your letter after all these years, and I am finally ready to say thank you for keeping her alive. 3 days later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was soft, warm, and trembling with emotion. Terrence, this is Simone. I got your letter. They talked for 2 hours. They cried, they laughed, they shared stories. Simone describing her recovery, the scar that ran down her chest, the way she sometimes pressed her hand over her heart and wondered about the woman who gave it to her. Terrence described Janelle, her career as a nurse, her dedication to her patients, the way she could calm anyone with just her presence. She sounds incredible, Simone whispered. She was. By the end of the call, they had made a plan. The following Saturday, Terrence and Caleb stood on the front porch of a modest brick home on the east side of Cleveland. Caleb clutched a small bouquet of sunflowers, Janelle's favorite. Why are we bringing flowers, Daddy? Terrence knelt down to his son's level. Because we're about to meet some very special people, and these flowers are a way of saying, that we're glad they're here. Caleb accepted this explanation with the simple faith that only children possessed. Terrence straightened up and knocked on the door. For a moment, nothing. Then, footsteps. The door swung open. Simone Monroe was in her late 30s, with warm hazel eyes and auburn hair that fell past her shoulders. She was shorter than Terrence had imagined, and there was a faint scar visible just above the neckline of her sweater. But it was her expression that stopped him. The moment she realized who was standing on her doorstep, her hand flew to her chest, pressing against the place where Janelle's heart now lived. "You're Terrence," she breathed. It wasn't a question. He nodded, unable to speak. Behind Simone, a smaller figure appeared, a 7-year-old girl with bright, curious eyes and wavy auburn hair pulled back with butterfly clips. Kira, the girl who'd written the purple-inked letter, the girl who'd cracked open a door that had been sealed for 5 years. She spotted Caleb and her face lit up. "Caleb, you came!" Caleb grinned, a real, genuine smile that Terrence hadn't seen in weeks. "I brought flowers. They were my mommy's favorite." Kira studied the sunflowers with serious eyes. "They're pretty. My mama loves flowers too." Simone stepped forward. And then, without words, without hesitation, she pulled Terrence into an embrace. He stiffened at first, caught off guard, but then he felt it. Her heartbeat, pressing against his chest, steady and strong. Not Simone's heart, Janelle's. The rhythm was achingly familiar in a way that defied explanation. How many nights had he fallen asleep to that exact sound, his head resting on Janelle's chest? How many times had he felt that pulse beneath his fingertips? Simone's voice was barely a whisper. "She's still here. She's been with me every single day." Terrence couldn't respond. Tears slid silently down his face. They stood there for a long moment, two strangers bound together by tragedy and hope, by loss and survival, by a heart that refused to stop beating. Behind them, Kira reached out and took Caleb's hand. "I told you," she said simply. "Our mamas knew each other before we did." The rest of that evening unfolded like a dream. They sat in Simone's cozy living room, sharing stories and memories. Simone described her journey, the years of illness, the terrifying surgery, the slow recovery. "The first time I walked around the block without getting winded, I cried for an hour," she said, laughing through her tears. "I kept thinking, I'm alive. I'm actually alive." She talked about watching Kira learn to ride a bicycle, about starting a small catering business from her kitchen, about simple moments, grocery shopping, attending parent-teacher conferences, reading bedtime stories that she had once feared she would never experience. "Your wife gave me all of that," Simone said softly. "Every ordinary, extraordinary moment." Terrence shared stories too, about Janelle's career, her patience, her habit of singing badly and burning pancakes, about their wedding day, their tiny apartment, the first time she held Caleb. For the first time in 5 years, speaking Janelle's name didn't feel like touching a wound. It felt like honoring a legacy. Years have passed since that first meeting on Simone's doorstep. The Hayes and Monroe families are no longer strangers connected by circumstance. They are family in every way that matters. Caleb and Kira, now in middle school, consider each other siblings. They argue about video games and help each other with homework and share secrets that neither set of parents will ever know. Terrence and Simone have become close friends, meeting for coffee, coordinating carpools, leaning on each other during hard days. Every year, on the anniversary of Janelle's passing, both families gather together, not to mourn, to celebrate. They tell stories about the woman whose heart saved Simone's life. They look at photographs. They eat sunflower-shaped cookies that Kira insists on baking every year. And Terrence finally understands something he couldn't see during those dark early years of grief.
Janelle never really left. She lives in the son she raised for 2 precious years, in his curious eyes, in his thoughtful silences, in his stubborn chin. She lives in the patients she comforted during her career, patients who probably still remember the nurse with the gentle voice and steady hands. And she lives, quite literally, in Simone's chest, a heart that beats steady and strong, giving life where there would have been none. Terrence keeps the note Kira wrote in his wallet, its purple ink now faded, but its message eternal. Maybe that's why I wanted to be your friend. Some connections, he has learned, cannot be explained. They can only be felt in the quiet moments, in the unexpected encounters, in the children who somehow find each other on a playground without knowing why. There is no logic to it, no scientific explanation, just the simple, profound truth that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms, it travels, it finds new ways to reach us. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to unfold the crumpled note, to open the sealed letters, to knock on the stranger's door, we discover that the people we lost never really left at all. They've been with us all along, beating, alive, home. If this story touched your heart today, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what this story made you feel. Tell me about someone you've lost who still feels close, even now. And if you're new here, welcome to Soul Tales. This is what we do. We share stories that remind us what it means to be human. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I promise you, the next story will move you just as deeply. Until then, carry the people you love with you, in your memories, in your actions, in your heart. They're still there. They're always there.